Welcome to Marin Voices and Views. With my co-host, Lawrence A. Strick, I'm Peter B. Collins. Returning to our show today is our Congressman, Democrat Jared Huffman, who we think will begin his third term in January. He currently serves on the Natural Resources and Transportation Committees. Larry?
Welcome back, Jared. It's nice to see you.
Good to be back. Do you have any guests that have appeared on your show more than me?
Damon Conley.
Conley.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
But you're close.
Okay, good. Well, it's good to be back.
Good, yeah, we love having you here. And we're recording today 2 weeks prior to the election.
Okay.
An election that just seems to be going on since we were children.
It's endless.
And what we're experiencing is pretty unique and really rather toxic. What's your view of it, though, from the angle that you're looking at elections and these candidates?
Right, so you just referred to the duration and the toxicity. So I would love to do something on both fronts. The duration is one I think we don't talk about enough. I was just with some visiting friends from Europe, and they are really sick of our election and are just stunned at how long it goes on forever and ever. It's not that way in other countries. I don't think it needs to be that way in this country, and I hope, once we lift the shackles of Citizens United and get back to the business of putting some sideboards and parameters on our election process, that we can include that piece too. Members of the House, by the way, who are up every 2 years are on an almost permanent election treadmill.
I'm sure you are.
So we really should try to create an election season, if you will, to rein in some of the money and also spare the American people the agony of this, overexposed drama that we've been seeing.
Well, apparently the only thing there is consensus or unanimity on is that we're tired of this election and we'd like it to be over.
Well, in England, they went from Cameron to their new leader within weeks.
Right.
I mean, it's
they
not
forgot
like
to have an election, Larry.
Well, but still,
I don't want to emulate everything about the English system either, but we can improve upon our great American system with a few
I think
changes.
So.
Got to ask you about one of the things that I've observed over the course of this campaign, and that is the Democratic response, which is Russia is responsible for the hacks of the Democratic National Committee and more recently campaign chairman or co-chair John Podesta's emails.
Right.
And in the third debate, Secretary Clinton asserted that 17 intelligence agencies have confirmed this. And I find that extremely far-fetched.
Well, there aren't 17 intelligence agencies. So she was referring to all of our intelligence agencies plus the outside intelligence community, which includes, some contractors and experts that we look to from time to time. So I just want to clarify what I think she was referring to.
But what we actually heard was James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence, on October 7th, offering an assertion that these activities are consistent with. So this was not any, slam dunk confirmation. And to expand from him and the Homeland Security Secretary, Jay Johnson, who appeared with him that day, and then to extend from 2 to 17, it's just, to me, emblematic of the way this has been used. And, we found out that the Sony hack was an insider, not North Korea. And so maybe you're picking up that I'm a little skeptical of our intelligence community, particularly when their information is being interjected into a political campaign.
Right. Well, you're going to have to educate me on that Sony information because I had not seen anything conclusive that ruled out North Korea there. All I can tell you is this, Peter. The information I get as a member of Congress is very nonpartisan. The intelligence community updates that we get from time to time. And it's not a democratic thing. So to push back respectfully on the way the question was framed, Marco Rubio is saying this too. And all the Republicans on the Intelligence Committee and who have access to those briefings have agreed with the Democrats that the forensic work that's been done points very clearly to Russian state-sponsored hackers that are doing a bunch of other things too. This is not the only thing they're doing. But I have no reason to dispute that.
Okay.
One of the high points of the legislative season that you just engaged in was the Democratic sit-in last June in the House which you took part in.
Yeah.
I actually saw you on TV, over its refusal to vote on some of the gun control measures.
Right.
How did that come about, and whose idea was using the social media, and was that, how coordinated was that with you guys? And was it the young congressman versus the old congressman, or give us some
Yeah.
inside baseball stuff on that.
Well, it was multi-generational.
Right.
And I think the reason it was so effective, and I would say in the 4 years that I've been there, it's the one thing that House Democrats have done that has captured national and even international attention and sustained it. Why was it so effective? I think it was because it was so organic and authentic, and it wasn't particularly pre-planned. It happened one day when John Lewis and a handful of others were going to the floor to make some speeches in the aftermath of the Orlando mass shooting, and all of us were fed up with the empty moment of silence that Speaker Ryan offered as our only congressional response to yet another mass shooting. And when the Republican majority decided to gavel down and turn the lights out and not even allow these speeches to go forward on the floor, very spontaneously, John Lewis and a few others said, "We're not leaving. We're going to stand here and talk even if the microphones aren't on." And word went out to many of us to come down and show solidarity for them. And so I was on my way to a California delegation lunch. We meet at noon on that day. And I redirected and joined them. And little did I know that I would be there for about the next 18 hours, I think it turned out. It just kept going. Members came to the floor. And because the cameras were turned off and the microphones were cut, some of our more tech-savvy members figured out that they could use Facebook Live and other programs like that on their cell phones to get the word out. And C-SPAN and others decided to start covering our basically bootlegged coverage, the stuff the Republicans didn't want you to hear about our gun violence epidemic.
And do you use Periscope every day now?
I don't, but I certainly saw the power of it in that particular case.
I was hoping you were going to say it was all John Lewis. He knew what he was doing. and not only is he dean of the House just about, but he's tech savvy too.
But he was the moral authority behind it all.
Absolutely.
And we were all very excited to follow his lead on this.
I thought it was an excellent use of power of the minority. I do have problems staking so much on the linkage to the no-fly, no-buy proposal. And my issue is that the no-fly list is secret, it's arbitrary. If you're on it, you can't get off it.
Well, you can, but
well,
it's
tell me
certainly-
how. I'd like to know about that because the general public doesn't know, what court you go to or what office where you apply to get a correction if you're placed on the no-fly list. So I just think fundamentally it's a very wobbly foundation constitutionally for a new kind of law.
So we should work on that, and we should make it so that if anybody's erroneously put on that list, there is an understandable and efficient way to get that error corrected. But I will tell you one person I know who was erroneously on that list, Congressman John Lewis. And he was able, with a few phone calls to explain that he was not the John Lewis that they thought he was.
Right.
And he went about his travel after that. But look, there's already a constitutional right to travel. The Supreme Court recognized it a long time ago. So if we're concerned about the integrity of this no-fly list encroaching on some constitutional right, here we've been talking about the Second Amendment right to buy a gun, but it's already, if it's a problem, it's already encroaching on the right to travel. Let's fix it. Let's provide the accuracy and the reliability and the due process in that no-fly list. But let's also recognize that there are going to be people who do belong on that list. We don't want them to get on airplanes because they're dangerous. And the point that we're making is if they're too dangerous to get on an airplane, they should also be too dangerous to buy a weapon.
No, that's a very simple notion, and I don't object to that if, as you say, we can fix the underlying no-fly list and, the process is more transparent,
Absolutely.
particularly for American citizens.
And what that bill and other bills involving the criminal background check system are really getting at is that there are massive loopholes for states that do not require criminal background checks for every gun sale. Now, here in California, we do. We've pretty much covered all the different ways you can buy a gun, and we have required you to involve a licensed dealer who will conduct a criminal background check in basically any type of sale. But go to Virginia, and you've got a massive loophole in what they call the private seller exception. Between private sellers and private buyers, you don't have to do the background check. And in fact, they don't even have to make a record of who you are. You can do cash transactions, and it happens at every gun show, and it happens on the internet, and it happens all over the place. So that's where people who are on the no-fly list, people who have convictions for domestic violence and adjudicated violent, mentally ill people, others who by law should not have a gun, we ought to be able to prevent them from having that gun, but we can't do it if we don't close those loopholes and do the background check.
Mm-hmm.
You were successful over the last term of obtaining some grants for people here in Marin. A Health and Human Services grant for health centers, some money for stranded marine mammals, both big issues in our county.
Yeah.
How are you able to secure those funds without earmarks in bills?
Yes, good question.
And being in the minority.
And being
in the minority. Well, here's the way you do it. The administration, basically the executive branch, makes, in the absence of earmarks, makes virtually all of the funding decisions across the board. What I can do as a member of Congress is advocate on behalf of pending grant applications for my district and needs that I hope the administration will choose to fund. And then, you get to break some good news once in a while, like we did with those grant announcements. But those who don't like earmarks, and there's plenty of people that hear about earmarks and they think, oh, that's just abusive, terrible stuff. What you're essentially saying is you want a faceless bureaucracy to decide, how all the money gets spent. And I would argue that members of Congress who have to stand for election every couple of years are probably a better way of identifying regional district priorities, being accountable for those decisions then after they're made, and making sure that the money goes to meet the highest and best needs. Now, earmarks were never all of the spending, of course. The earmarks were always a very small portion of the discretionary budget. But it was a way, if you had something really critical in your district that you needed to get funded, you could, sometimes over time, but you could eventually find a way to get it there. And now you just are at the mercy, whoever happens to be in the White House.
Yeah, I was never that worked up about earmarks. I don't think that they were widely abused, and there has to be a way to rebuild a bridge or get the money that you need in a particular district.
I mean, it sounds like everything else, a few headline stories are what people are
Right.
looking at, and then they're throwing out the baby with the bathwater on everything else.
The bridge to nowhere always gets
Yeah.
mentioned, but look, you want a solution, a way we can have the benefits of earmark, the accountability, the better reflection of district priorities without the abuse. There is a way to do that, actually, and that would be for Congress to legislate, include earmarks, but to give the executive a chance to line item them out. I'm not talking about a line item veto, but I'm talking about a way for the executive to flag earmarks that they believe are not appropriate, and to force an up or down vote in Congress on each specific earmark when that happens. That way the whole body would have to vote on the bridge to nowhere.
Someone's name would be on it, too.
Exactly, and if it got flagged, it probably wouldn't pass.
You're getting pretty active in writing and introducing bills, so that's part of the growth as a member of Congress, and also seniority and influence help you get your bills passed. Now, a couple that I'm interested in probably don't stand much of a chance under Speaker Ryan. One is the liar's loophole, which would require a presidential candidate named Trump or somebody in the future to release their tax returns. But the other I find really fascinating, you call it Know Your Oil, and it requires disclosure of the source and the type of crude oil used in the production of gasoline or other products that consumers buy. Talk about that.
Okay, well, very quickly on this liar's loophole bill, that's to get at something that I think the general public doesn't understand. When someone says I can't disclose my tax returns because I'm under audit, I think the public doesn't understand that the IRS, by law, cannot even comment on that. The IRS cannot even say you're actually not under audit. because that is private taxpayer information. So with a very minor change in existing law, you could require all presidential candidates, when they make their initial financial disclosure, which is itself a waiver of a whole bunch of private information, that they would also have to provide at that time a verification from the IRS as to whether they are under audit. That way we would actually know whether someone like Donald Trump is telling the truth or whether he's lying.
His campaign hasn't answered the question if he received notice of the audit.
They've been very coy about it, and if you look at the letter they provided by from their attorneys, they don't even say audit.
Right.
They say review. So we're not even sure what that means.
Right.
Lots of red flags.
Know your oil.
Know Your Oil is a bill that addresses the fact that not oil is equal in terms of its climate footprint. We've got very dirty oil, like what we have from Canadian tar sands, for example. And I'm not going to tell you there's clean oil, there's no such thing, but there is less dirty oil. And I think it's important as we try to minimize our greenhouse gas footprint and reduce emissions, that we have a way of measuring it for consumers, certainly, who want to make better choices, but ultimately for government as we move, I hope, in the near future towards some kind of a carbon tax.
And we talked off the air about the parking of oil tanker cars on the SMART train sidings in Shelbyville, and we don't actually know exactly what's in those tankers, do we?
No, it's of great concern to me because what's going on there is the Freight Rail Authority that uses the same line as the SMART passenger rail system is taking advantage of a federal law that would seem to allow them to just park their cars anywhere, and that could be abused, and you could effectively become a storage depot for all types of toxic chemicals. Things that the constituents I represent would probably want to know about if they're being stored long term in areas close to, playgrounds, public facilities, etc. I'm troubled by the fact that the rail authority, the Freight Rail Authority, never did any environmental review involving storing these types of things. In fact, specifically said in their prior environmental reviews that they were not going to do transporting of toxic materials. It seems someone changed their mind. If that's going to be the case, there's a process that I think needs to be followed so the public can be in on that decision and give it a good hard look.
You also authored a bill to ease travelers for Americans whose spouses are not American. And you referred to that as the binational family bill. Is there a problem with that?
Well,
what's going on here?
There could be a problem with that. And what happened at the end of last year, there was an omnibus bill because we had not passed our budgets and our appropriation bills like your civics class tells you you're supposed to do every year. So there's usually a fire drill in Congress at the end of the year, and you come up with some last-minute omnibus bill to avoid a government shutdown. We did that last year. And in that bill was included a visa waiver reform piece of legislation. And what it was getting at is the concern, a security concern, that you have a lot of people in Europe who may be Syrian nationals. They may have done a bunch of travel to Syria or other theaters where there's a lot of conflict. And because they may have a passport from a country that we have a visa waiver agreement with, they could come into the United States without any additional screening. And so I think there was rightfully a desire to provide some additional scrutiny for folks who maybe have been spending some time in Syria. But we went further than that. We identified a bunch of different countries, and included among them is Iran, for example, where we have no reason to believe that the hundreds of thousands of Iranian American citizens present a security threat, and yet they could be triggered for retaliatory visa restrictions from all of our European allies if they push back against our change in the visa waiver restriction. It's very complicated, and I probably didn't explain it well for a lay audience, but if you are a binational family, the bottom line is, because of an act of Congress at the end of last year, it may not be smooth traveling for you if you're going to Europe. And I want to make sure that we're really only targeting people that require extra scrutiny and not punishing people just because of their because of their names or their families.
And Jared, if one of our viewers has an issue like that, is there a point person in your office they could contact?
Yeah, there is, and I hope they will. So they should just Google Representative Huffman, call my Santa Fe office, folks that would be watching your show. And we actually have some excellent staff that have figured out how to navigate these immigration questions quite well.
Mm-hmm. Over the summer, I think it was in May, I attended your town hall in Ross about the Ross Valley flood control issues. And it was focused on the drainage problems in Corte Madera Creek on the outflow from San Anselmo to the bay.
Mm-hmm.
And the Army Corps of Engineers had a representative present, and they promised that they were going to get back to you with a report this fall. Shock me and tell me that that's on track.
Well, I actually got a briefing on their work just last week. So I don't know if that qualifies as the report or if this qualifies as the fall. I think it does. But I'm satisfied that they're working hard. And one of the things that impresses me is that they're having all kinds of meetings with members of the community and trying to think creatively and outside the box. A generation ago, the Army Corps came to town and created a really awful concrete ditch through part of the Ross Valley in Corte Madera Creek, and it was not good for the environment, and it didn't even perform as advertised for flood protection. So it's really important to me that whatever they're bringing as, we hope, a flood improvement for upstream portions, upstream of that concrete channel, that it reflects our values and that it works for the community. And I think they've got some good ideas. So it's not quite ready for unveiling, but I'm cautiously pleased at what I've heard, and the community will be hearing about this very soon.
Great.
I have to ask you something about the Affordable Care Act. Apparently, if you're a Republican, you have to repeal and replace it. I mean, that we know
You just
that.
have to.
You have to.
Yeah.
But I think it's also pretty common knowledge that the Democrats and other folks would like to tweak it to increase its availability to people who are going to purchase insurance. And there's some problems. The prices of it's private insurance. Private insurance keeps on going up. The Republicans don't seem to understand that.
Right.
And a bunch of the companies are bailing on it. The insurance companies don't want to be in the market.
In some markets.
Is it ever going to be possible to get people in a room where you work to sit down, roll up their sleeves, and take a look at the Affordable Care Act and make the kind of changes, other than moving the lines, that are going to make it more affordable for people and keep the insurance companies in?
I hope so. You have to, though, bring a spirit of problem solving to the work that you do, and right now it's much more about political posturing than problem solving. I'm told that there was a time when the Republicans were the ones passing a health care reform
With a
bill
mandate.
with Medicare Part D, actually. I believe that this was a George W. Bush initiative on prescription drugs. Democrats were mixed on it, but after its passage, I'm told that there continued to be bipartisan problem solving to fine-tune it and improve it as it went forward. You just don't see that with the Affordable Care Act. So where do we go from here? We do have to get to work on it because it's not perfect. But I think you'd have to have one heck of a case of amnesia to forget the premium increases that we regularly saw before the Affordable Care Act. So the idea that just because we're seeing some double-digit premium increases means that the Affordable Care Act is to blame and that it all has to be repealed, and they say replaced, by the way, Larry, but I've yet to hear them articulate any kind of a significant replacement. They really just, I'm not even sure they really want to repeal, because the backlash that would come to any party that repealed some of the benefits that we have now experienced under the Affordable Care Act would be enormous. They just want to play politics with this, and I'd like to get to work on making it work better.
Is Speaker Ryan ever going to take a look at this and let you guys do that, though? If there's a President Clinton?
Speaker Pelosi might.
Well, Speaker Pelosi, I think she might, yes.
And, Speaker fill in the blank might. I mean, depending how this election goes, I'm not sure Speaker Ryan can even hang on to this job that he probably doesn't like very much right about now. So we'll see. The whole world could change November 9th, and we'll just have to see what the voters say.
Well, whether it's Speaker Pelosi or another Democrat in the future, it's pretty clear that we need to take on the gerrymandering that's occurred in 30 states where it's red all the way, legislature and governor, and after the 2010 census, they redrew the districts to benefit Republicans. Democrats did it in the past, so I'm not just demonizing them, but to rebalance the playing field, President Obama has announced that one of his post-presidential projects will be to work on getting Democrats elected in red and purple states so that when the 2020 census comes out, that we might have a fair shot at redistricting. What do you think about that?
I think he's picking a really important cause. We've got to get ahead of the next redistricting because Democrats, just got caught snoozing the last time around. And whether it's, governor's races or state legislatures, we got out-hustled, outspent, out-organized, and we paid the price in the 2010 through 2012 redistricting and reapportionment.
So do you think that it can be turned around? I am a fan of the Independent Redistricting Commission here in California.
Me too.
But can we get North Carolina to adopt that?
It is one of these things that has bipartisan appeal when you just put it out there. Remember, our independent redistricting was a Republican idea.
Absolutely.
Here in California. If I'm not mistaken, it was one of the demands of maybe Abel Maldonado or one of those other Republicans for their budget vote.
It was part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there certainly ought to be Republicans. I mean, these ideas happen because Republican think tanks cook them up and put them out there, and Republican legislators ask for them. So I hope there's still some support in Republican think tank land for this. I don't see any evidence that there is, though. I think they've sort of figured out that independent redistricting actually helps Democrats. And so they've kind of started to run from it. Mm-hmm. And if anything, they probably would be very threatened in states like Florida that would probably swing a whole bunch of seats to Democrats if you could just draw fair lines.
Congressman Jared Huffman, thanks for joining us again today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.